I want to show how auth works on my lab network and my cluster. So it's Kerberized OpenLDAP, and you know it's a little more than it's blended with SSH, so it's a little more than regular SSH. So here on the screen I'm kind of tailing the LDAP logs in the top right, and then in the bottom right is Kerberos. So this is my KDC down here, and then up here is the OpenLDAP server running the slab daemon. So a lot of times this is the pattern to like log in, right? I usually use fish shell, but I think I'm going to switch to bash. You'll see why in just a second. But essentially, the first thing you do with Kerberos is you can klist to see if you have any credentials, and right now I don't. The machine that I'm on is known to the KDC by what's called a key tab. So we can see what's in the key tab. Type my impossibly long password. We can see what's in the key tab by passing certain flags to klist, and you can see down on the bottom right it jumped. Oh, one more thing, my username here is different than my principal on the KDC. So my user on the Kerberos server and in OpenLDAP is a different name, and that's known as a principal. So I want to show what happens when I try to log in to, let's say, one of the nodes in my cluster, right? So you're probably familiar with this pattern, right? So you start the SSH agent, and then SSH, you would add your credentials. So what are mine? Like, mine are just the common default name for a public and private key pair. So that's my password for my SSH keys. So now if I try to SSH using my principal, like my name in the lab network, in the cluster, it fails, right? And you can see down here, it's saying, no way, no creds. It actually tries two methods to authenticate. I don't know quite know why it shows public key, because obviously it won't take a key. Oh, I think because I have it commented out in the config, but so the config looks kind of like this. So let's see. So this is my user's SSH configuration in my home directory. So you can see for all hosts in the lab subnet, use this user name, and then these are the two auth types that are accepted. Right? These here, GSS, are all for Kerberos. Interestingly enough, I had to, I don't know how you say this word, I guess canonicalize, like tell SSH, force it to use the full host name, because when you look at the authorized hosts in the key tab, it's FQDN. It's not just the host name, right? Which is this first name here. So to get SSH and Kerberos to work together, you have to tell them, hey, use these canonicalized names, 3 dots in the name, right? So host dot lab dot domain dot TLD. So if now I were to authenticate to the KDC, we'll see the difference. So remember, I have no creds. So if I say like initialize as myself, even longer password, so you can see it kind of jumped this log down here in the bottom right. Now I have a ticket. Great. So what happens is when I go to SSH, we'll see a couple things happen here. So let me paste this command. So what I'm doing is, all in one shot, I'm passing an environment variable, KRB5 trace, right? So pass the logs to standard out. So we'll see them in this window. And I'm just cranking the debug way up on SSH, and then telling it which user to log in to which host as. I think, I don't know that this is strictly necessary, but if you pass minus capital K, that forces Kerberos. So we're going to see it, a lot of text fly by. So let's see what happens. So we saw both windows kind of jump that time. So what happened? Well, we had a key, and there's a lot of debug, but this session did the canonicalizing, right? So it turned the host name into the FQDN, SSH did, which made it match what was in the key tab on the host I started from. And then we start to figure out ways that are acceptable for us to authenticate to the target. So it found a bunch of keys. So when it says found key type, they're not going to be used, right? So it'll find them, it'll load them, and also it's Kerberos is also at the same time doing its thing. So you can see here, what happens here is we actually make a DNS URI query for the host. So even though we have a config file in etc for Kerberos, DNS has special records that will allow us to find the Kerberos KDC. So what do I mean by that? So real quick, this is my Ansible for the whole lab. So these are all the machines in the lab. But if we look under DNS, it's a little hard to see. Here we go. So this is the forward zone file. So I have a primary and secondary DNS server in the lab network. So this is the forward zone file. So when it did that lookup, this is what it came back with, right? So KRB5, SRV, and M are boilerplate. TCP or UDP just tells it like which port. So TCP I think would be right there, 749. But essentially that's what happened. A lookup there. Oh, this is interesting too. As a fallback, if the URI record isn't there or is messed up, so for example, I had this entry here but without quotes around it because the MIT Kerberos page, the example, didn't have quotes. It falls back to these SRV records. So that's pretty cool. You can find the server, I think, faster that way. So it does a lot of key exchange. There are your algorithms you can use. It does some negotiation, exchanges the keys, and looks quite different than if you were to do this with a public key. And you can see here, remember in that config file, we said we want GSS keyx or the other type, MIC, I think, MIC. But essentially it's not going to do public key. Even though it says, hey, I found one, I'm going to skip it, right? So you can see as time goes by, it's trying different methods, but I think this method succeeded. Yeah, when you start to see this, that means you made it. And interestingly, it passes our creds to the target. So I think that's it for the Kerberos part. I think if we look at the LDAP piece, which is the window up here in the upper right, let's see if we can figure out a little bit about how LDAP works, is configured, is a part of all this. So there's a config file that Ansible pushes to all the nodes, all the client nodes. I don't push this config to the KDC. Like there's some hosts that are you don't want users logging into, but essentially this base is the base in the LDAP, right? So here's the LDAP server, and this is the magic right here, right? So you're telling it use SASL with Kerberos and LDAP. Okay. So if I do, let's see, just an LDAP search, because I have a key, a ticket, excuse me, because I have a ticket, it does this authentication when I do an LDAP search, and you can see those details go by over here every time. Just to prove it, like if I do kdestroy, now I get unspecified failure. Well, it actually tells me here, no Kerberos credentials available. All right, so that's okay. I'm gonna actually, let's do this. This will make it a little easier to see. Let's do it without all the tracing and debug showing. Oops. There we go. So let's see. Now it works again because our ticket came with us from the other host. The other thing you can do with LDAP is do a search as admin. So according to the docs, to do a search as the admin, you have to pass it a couple things. So you pass it the base, DN, and then this capital W flag, which I think prompts you for the admin creds in OpenLDAP. So yeah, here it's telling me you have to give us a password. So yep, sure enough, that time it prompted me for the password and I was successful. So those are the highlights. That's how I can enforce auth policy across the lab network and all the nodes. I'm working on more Kerberized apps. The other thing that's mildly interesting, if I switch back to my fish shell, I've been working on something called pre-auth. So if I do k init, you can kind of see in my history here. So essentially I have a key and a cert, and I still do kinit. I'm not quite sure that this is working though, because I think it's supposed to be passwordless if you have the key and the cert. I have pre-auth turned on, so I'm not quite sure why. I don't quite understand this yet, but you can see that. I'll just pick a different node, right? Like this works, even without the minus capital K. And I don't see any logs this time about pre-auth, but yeah, that's a bit of a work in progress. I think if I can get the pre-auth piece working, then it's just totally passwordless Kerberos, OpenLDAP, all integrated. But I think the risk is you have to really protect the cert, right? The private key. So yeah, pretty cool. Takes a while to get it working. Not for the faint of heart. Not a beginner level project. So I'd be interested to hear from anyone else who had this working, what you thought about it, especially in a home setup. It's maybe a bit over the top. But yeah.